Welcome back to Locked On Sun Devils. We got a great show here today. Special guest, Hode Rubino, publisher of DevilsDigest.com. But before we do that, today's show is brought to you by Odoo. Great organizations win because operations matter, and that's why you should get Odoo. Try it for free today at odoo.com/lockedon. That is odoo.com/lockedon. Today, Morgan State, how much of it is going to be on audition for these quarterbacks versus cementing things in stone? Assuming a quarterback wins, looks good, who leaves in December? Who stays to fight for another role? But we're going to start with the question that I think everyone has been asking in some way, shape, or form, and our guest is uniquely positioned to answer. How do you evaluate these guys as you try to figure out exactly who your starting quarterback is going to be?
Well, I think they really are gonna take their time and make sure that they're not rushed into a decision. And there's really no reason for them to be rushed into one. They obviously had all three quarterbacks vying for the positions: Cutter Bowley, Jake Fady, and Mikey Keene in spring practice. So it is a pretty much level playing field in terms of how many reps each quarterback did get. I mean, maybe Bowley got a little more than the Jake Fetty when it's all said and done. But nonetheless, I think that they do have a good foundation to work on going into fall camp. They always want to make sure that ultimately you're not choosing necessary evil or the least worst option out of the three. And I don't think that's going to be the case at all. I think that all three quarterbacks did give Kenny Dillingham and their staff a lot to think about. And I think in fall camp, things usually do end up separating themselves somewhat throughout, I would say, that midweek point of camp. I would say coming out of Camp Arizona, if you want to be a little more specific, maybe you're not going to have a starter announced right there, right then. But I think that you're going to have a pretty clear direction. Maybe not who the starter is, but maybe who's the number one, number two quarterback that might be vying for that starting role, and who is the number three quarterback that may have too much of a gap to make up by the time the season opener begins.
All right, so you said it's three quarterbacks right now, and I know we've heard some stuff about Cam Dyer is an interesting guy, but assuming it is Keene, Fetty, Bowley, what do each of them have to? If you have to say, okay, there's one thing each of them have to improve on, going from fall across summer into spring, what do they have to show Kenny and the rest of the crew to go and claim that number one spot?
I think collectively they just really have to show that they can operate this offense at the highest level. I'm sure you talked a lot about in your previous podcast that ASU's wide receiver transfer portal hole has been absolutely incredible. I know some people talk about it, but I almost feel like in some ways it's really not talked about enough. And maybe folks are having apprehensions of how great this passing game can be just because the quarterback situation is not really settled. And maybe nobody's coming into this quarterback competition with such a great resume behind them that is causing some folks to be lukewarm on this passing game. The approach that I take is that I just feel that the arsenal of wide receivers is so incredible that any quarterback pretty much that's going to be there delivering the ball to them is going to make them look good, and in turn they'll make him look good. So I think that the obvious accuracy, decision making, getting the ball in a quick manner, making sure you can connect on the deep ball on a consistent basis. I think those are the things that you look at. Obviously, leadership is really good, is really going to be huge. But also, I think mobility is a huge aspect in the Kenny Dillingham offense. I don't think you want to see a quarterback run more than they need to, but mobility is not really only gaining first downs with your feet; is also being operating off platform. If a play breaks down, how can you still make sure that there is a play to be had? So I think those are some of the aspects that I don't think is going to be looked at more on one quarterback than another, but rather just a collective set of skills that each quarterback has to make sure that they perform at a high level. Maybe there's not going to be a starting quarterback that does one or two aspects really really well, and the rest at a lesser level. But just to make sure that there's some kind of standard that needs to be met in each and every skill set, and just make sure that the quarterback can reach a level, let alone exceed it. I think that's what the coaching staff is really looking for.
And when you talk about this mobility, because I feel like this is something that's been pretty heavily discussed. You go to your site, you look at the forums, you look at everyone talking, because Cutter Boley at Kentucky, everyone's saying, well, he's actually more athletic than he was at Kentucky, but from what you look at the film, not necessarily this archetype of a mobile quarterback in the way Sam Levitt was. How worried should we be about how again he was able to move last year?
Yeah, I don't think we should be worried at all because ultimately it does come down to what is your offensive coordinator, what is your offense in terms of its scheme and sort of its philosophy is asking you from you as a quarterback. And I don't think Cutter Bowley was really asked to really be all that mobile and to really create a lot of plays with his feet. Let's not forget that also Cutter Bowley in 2025 that was his first year as a starter as a redshirt freshman. So he's still a very young signal caller. I still think that he comes in with much more experience into Tempe compared to Sam Levitt a few years ago, who only played 4 games for Michigan State and then came up, pretty raw into ASU. Now, obviously, he had a great first year, with the Sun Devils. Don't take anything away from that, but in terms of just the been there, done that, I think that aspect with Cutter Bowley is much higher than it was with Sam Levitt back then. And I think we saw mobility at a level that was definitely satisfactory from Cutter Bowley in spring practice. So I think that if you're going to knock down Cutter Bowley for lack of mobility, to me that's really a misguided. Because if you were there in spring practice, you know that that's really not an aspect you need to worry about. And B, there's just no snowball chance in hell that Kenny Dillingham and his staff would recruit a quarterback like Cutter Bowley, and they were on him, as you know, right when the transfer portal
Mhm.
window opened. If his mobility was questionable, if his mobility was average at best, I just don't think he'd be the quarterback that ASU would pursuing. So I think mobility is not going to be an issue with Cutter Bowley. Again, I know that fans that are not there at spring practice will just look at his film at Kentucky and not be really impressed. But I think that if you're an ASU fan and you're doubting Cutter Bowley's mobility and Bowley may end up being the starter, I think it can be a pleasant surprise of what you're going to see starting in September.
And then, following off this idea that he does have a ton of SEC starts, he really good accuracy rating outside of the 12 interceptions.
Yeah.
How much do you think the coaching staff are valuing that, say, that experience? You got Mikey Keene with 5 years. He played it for tore us up back in 2023.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Versus that was not fun. Versus this Jake Fetty, who, from everything I'm hearing, is pushing Cutter Bowley really hard. He's got these physical attributes, this mobile quarterback style, even if he's not as tall. But especially in the context of we play A&M week 2 at Cal Field, doesn't necessarily have that starting experience in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, I mean, I think that out of the three, obviously Mikey Keene, like you said, he really is the most experienced quarterback out there. I think the fact that he did have to sit out his lone year with Michigan in 2025 due to injury, it doesn't negate all the experience that he brings to the table. But I think in terms of being somewhat rusty and getting maybe a little longer, getting in the groove of things, because working out on your own is nothing like a full blown scrimmage during spring practice. I think that's something that could ultimately really hurt him in this quarterback race. But in terms of experience, I think Cutter Bowley again doesn't have a tons of experience. I don't think anybody should say otherwise. But like you said, really being an everyday starter in the SEC as a redshirt freshman, I don't think that's something that people should gloss over. I know they talk about their interceptions, and that's something I've talked to staff on and off the record, and they just feel that sometimes in the framework of an offensive scheme, quarterbacks can sometimes really make throws that are ill advised when you don't have that many great weapons around you. That's something that contributes to it. And a lot of people also told me that look, I mean, nearly half of his interceptions were desperation throws, or they were hail marys. They were trying to make a play on a third or fourth down. So you have to put really think matters in context if you're going to start thinking that Cutter Boley cannot overcome his interception issue. And again, I don't feel that Kenny Dillingham, who definitely has a reputation of being a quarterback guru, would go as hard as he would be after a quarterback like Cutter Boley if he felt that that interception bug is going to come and bite him about down the road. I just really refuse to believe that. And when you look at you know being able to recognize what a quarterback has, whether it's limited game film like Sam Levitt had, only playing 4 games for Michigan State, come to ASU, or you have a lot of game film like a guy like Cutter Boley. I think that Kenny Dillingham does know exactly what quarterback can really fit a system both. Jake Fetty, I agree with you. I mean, has been very impressive in spring practice, but the question is, when is it going to start showing that he is a freshman? And that's not a knock on Jake Fetty. That's something you can say about any freshman out there. I mean, we had running back Carday Mack, the defensive end Julian Hugo, Daquan Dunn, the cornerback, all looked great as true freshmen in spring. But as somebody who's been doing this for nearly 27 years, I know that freshman bug, if you will, doesn't rear his ugly head always in the spring. Sometimes it takes in fall camp to really have that effect. So I'm really curious to see if Jack Fetty, who I think built a really strong foundation in the spring, can really build on it that much more and be a threat that much more to Cutter Bowl as a starter in fall camp. But I do believe that experience ultimately will prevail. And if you told me that because of the inexperience, Jake Fetty is going to have to start the season as quarterback number 3, and that Boley is probably going to be the starter with Mikey Keene backing him up. I don't think anybody should really fall off their chair if that's going to be the scenario, because, like I said, there's no substitute experience at the end of the day.
I think that's kind of where we've been in this show as well. The other question, I think, if Fetty does win, is Boley backup? Is he 3? How does that go? But that's a question for a bit of a different show. The question then becomes, whoever wins this job, there are 3 other quarterbacks in the room. What happens to them in December, assuming that quarterback has a good year?